are in listen-only mode.
Alrighty, hello everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar titled Using Storytelling to Enhance Exit Planning Engagements. First off, my name is Drew English. I'm the Program Coordinator here at the Exit Planning Institute. I am joined today by our speaker, Amy Wirtz of Family and Business Success. Amy is actually a SEPA, and she'll be teaching at our upcoming SEPA program in May, but she also brings over 25 years of experience as an attorney. Before I turn it over to Amy today for our topic, a few housekeeping notes from myself. First off, the webinar is being recorded, and it will be sent out via email after the webinar concludes. So just look for an email from myself later today with that attachment. Secondly, is the question box. If you have questions, comments, or any insight throughout the presentation, please go ahead and type your question into the question box, which is located on the drop-down menu of the GoToWebinar panel on your screen. I will then facilitate those questions over to Amy at the end of her presentation. So please go ahead. We definitely encourage the questions and the comments throughout. But with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Amy. We can get going for today's topic. So Amy, it's all yours.
All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today and taking time out of your day to learn about storytelling as a tool in exit planning. So this whole seminar was born out of a conversation I had with Brooke of our company and how I was using storytelling to connect generations in a succession planning client that I had. So this idea came from me from all of my family law mediation training, because when you're mediating, you often allow people to tell their story. And it connects people's interest, it gets people to yes, and moves the whatever process you're trying to work through forward. So I want you just to take a second, take a deep breath, and for 30 seconds, think about your favorite family story. And when you think about that, what is the immediate emotional response that you get? Write that down. Now I want you to think about, where were you the first time you heard that story? So most of us have learned through storytelling, and I'm going to share with you one of my favorite family stories. So my family could be the characters in The Grape of Wrath, and the first time I really recognized that was when I went to visit my great aunt Margaret and Uncle Herman the summer I graduated from high school. And we were sitting around their kitchen table in Orange County, California, and they were talking. I asked them, how did you meet? And so here's the story of how they met. Margaret was 16, unemployed, and living in the poorest part of Oklahoma. They had a shack. It was wood. It had some shingles on it. No indoor plumbing. She had 3 siblings. It was in the 1930s. They had little to nothing. And she woke up one morning and her mother was gone. Her father had already left them, and they had very little to no food. And she had heard in town that there were jobs in California. So she looked at her 8-year-old sister, her 11 and 13-year-old brothers, and said, oh my gosh, I got to feed these kids. So she went on the back of a truck, a farm truck, and rode from Sallisaw, Oklahoma, all the way to LA, California. Now you have to think about, I was a very middle-class child who never went without food a day in her life. And I'm listening to this story and my aunt talking about how she got in a truck. She had nothing with her but her clothes. She had no food, she had no money. And she rode in the back of this truck all the way to downtown LA, got off, walked into a place that was a factory that had a help wanted sign, immediately got an interview, sat down at a desk, and this very nice man unfolded his lunch and was eating lunch in front of my aunt. And Herman, my Uncle Herman, described that as he was eating lunch, Margaret was answering none of his questions, but was staring at his liverwurst and onion sandwich and his apple, and that she wouldn't talk until he gave her half of that sandwich. And 3 weeks later, she had a job and a husband. What a great story, right? And they tell it from a romance standpoint. But I, a child of great means, was in shock that just my grandmother's generation were so poor that their shelter and source of nutrition was totally at risk. And for me, what I took away from that was my family grit. So when you think about your family story, what is it that you take away? And as SEPAs, we can use the power of emotion and storytelling to connect generations in transferring businesses, or owners to sellers, or employees to management. It's that emotional reaction that makes it a tool for us to use. So our learning objectives today are: identify 3 ways to begin conversations of storytelling and exit planning, how you can help create the family history and use it as a business lesson, and then once you get it, how do you transfer it? What are ways that you can transfer it? And then really talk about using storytelling as a tool in our tool bucket for SEPAs and helping us getting the exit planning implemented, started, and processed. So we all know from history that storytelling is how humans learn. It's been happening since the beginning of man. If you look at history and archaeology, cavemen painted stories on walls in order to tell their stories. The American Indians have one of the best oral story processes of any culture that we study. They have for centuries told lessons through stories. And if you think about the stories your parents tell you, your grandparents tell you, your aunts and uncles, there's usually a moral involved or some sort of thread of family history with it. We can take that tool as SEPAs and help start conversations, get through difficult conversations. When I go into public and talk about exit planning, the first question I hear in any audience is, how do you get people to talk about this? And I'm talking to lawyers and accountants and business owners. How do we start this conversation? And what I really came up with is what the owning generation wants before they hand over their business, whether it be an interfamily, an employee transfer, a strategic sell, or an open sell, is for someone to acknowledge what it took to get this business where it's at. And we can do that through storytelling. And if you talk to brokers of businesses, they do a lot of this in the marketing of a business. But if you can get the story processed in the beginning with the owner, you're going to come out ahead. So I'm going to just give you an example of telling a story. I ask my clients, why do you do what you do? And here's an example of the storytelling. And it takes a couple drafts. So I want you guys to think about this. Why do we do what we do? Since this is for a farming company. He wrote, since Mark was allowed to ride his bike, he rode to where his father and grandfather were working. He stayed as long as he was allowed, and he worked on the farm when his brothers and friends would be off playing. Mark was in the fields and on the fields when his friends were playing football, baseball, and basketball. He would regularly arrive late to wedding receptions and family get-togethers because he prioritized farming above all else. Mark is in love with farming. His fascination revolves around the miracle that is placed in every seed, animal, and living organism that exists on farms. He's fascinated, no matter what type or a plant or seed, at how quickly it grows and produces a product. This fascination began at his grandfather's dairy farm in the daily cycle and wonderment of milking cows. He began at the age of 18, working on a neighbor's farm, running the dairy farm, baling and milking. As a junior in high school, he became the herdsman for that farm. Today, his business is about raising plants and animals because it's what he loves to do. This family is creating a collective group of businesses that continue to grow along with what they raise. This business will provide for his family now and through their retirement. It will grow into a profit center for the family, community, and for future owners. His farm is becoming a business that will be sought after and coveted by other farmers. It will have buyers knocking on the door and employees seeking out his company for the opportunity to work in it. This farm will always be growing, thriving, and looking forward to the next opportunity. That's a short summation. Now I'm going to tell you how long it took him to do that. It took him 6 drafts. How did he do it? With my help. How is he using it? He's using it in a board prospectus for assembling a board of advisors. He used it to attract people to sit on his board of advisors. It's an internal document, not an external document. But what he told me is it was really the first time he captured why he works 16 hours a day. He had a blast doing this. And there are all kinds of ways to use this product. Very, very good skill to have. So this is what we used to look like way, way back in the old days. And now this is what we look like. The only thing missing in this picture is cell phones and tablets. When I talk to my family members, my mother-in-law, my father-in-law, my grandmother, they hate electronics. Why do they hate electronics? Because this is what family meals look like versus this. When learning was a form of storytelling, families respected their elders and listened. Today we do this. So what we can do as SEPAs is give that generation what they need so they can let go of their main identity, which is their business. So how are we going to do this? We do this by transferring legacies. Chris Snyder talks about the fact that when we're doing exit planning, we are trying to create legacies, whether that be in the transfer of the business to the next generation or harvesting the wealth from the business that these people have worked in maybe all of their lives, most of their lives, maybe they're 3 generations before them. When we talk about it being a legacy, we can tell the story of how that legacy was created. And even if it's sold and transferred into financial wealth for the next generation or for the community, then we're really passing on a legacy, not just a business. And when the family or the owners start making decisions based on legacy instead of money and power, that's when we can start changing the dynamic and helping it become something more than a piece of plastic that's made in a factory. So how do we get it started? We get it started by collaborating, communicating with each generation, and connecting interest. That sounds really simple, doesn't it? It's not. It takes a lot of time. What I'm going to tell you how I use this is I use this by questions. And we can do it in a variety of ways, but one of the things I like to do is have the youngest generation or the youngest employees or some of the youngest employees, if it's not a family-centered thing, interview the oldest generation working in the company or were owners. So I have a client who is running a campground, and they're passing it from 4th to 5th generation. And when I wanted to know about their business, I asked them, please tell me your first memory. So if you see on the slide, family members, what's your first memory of this business? So I'm going to just share with you some of their story. Here's the current owner. Here's his first memory of the campground. When I was 12 or 13, which makes it about 1968 or 69, we were at my grandparents' house in the old trailer park for the first Seder of Passover. Their house was also the campground office. One of the smallest closets in the house had been converted to a check-in office. It was Good Friday, and people were coming to check into the campground. For 8 hours, RVs were backed out to the main road. For the first time, we had 100 check-ins in one day. We were totally unprepared and shocked at the interest in camping that Easter weekend. I think from that moment on, my whole family felt different about the possibilities of turning our trailer park into a campground. Here's his wife's first memory. I was 16 working for my husband's father at the campground. I was driving a golf cart and parked it on a hill without pulling the emergency brake. The cart rolled forward into a shiny red Corvette of a person who lived in the trailer park. My father-in-law asked if I was okay and assured me that it was fine and nothing bad was going to happen. Not only did I feel forgiven, the family never raised the story back in again or threw it in my face when I made future mistakes. I will never forget the kindness my father-in-law showed me that day. An additional memory was I was at dinner at the camp, and a large family dinner in the house that also served as the front office and check-in. All through dinner, the bell would ring, and family members would get up and check people in and answer questions. My husband and his siblings or their parents moved into the campground house and lived with his grandparents during the busiest months of the summer, working the business from 6 a.m. until 11 p.m. at night, 7 days a week. It's a way of life, and clearly they loved it. I could not have fallen more in love, not only with my husband, but the whole notion of a family business. From the age of 16, I worked at this campground, learning the business step by step. I also worked for my husband when he opened a game room and a snack shack trailer in the evenings after working the front desk with my father-in-law every day. It was the best summer job working for this family. So as a SEPA, what can you learn about that story? It is a lot. So this is not just a business. This is the family. So when we're asking them to sell this business, we're asking them to sell a huge part of their identity and family fabric. And as SEPAs, we have to manage that emotion while we're managing the sale. If you don't ask and understand this, it's really hard for us to successfully move these people to the end point. The other things that we do is we ask the next generation, and you can ask them what their first memories are. And when you're talking about an intergenerational transfer, you really get a sense of responsibility. And you can use these stories for educating the next generation on the difference between owning and working in the business. If they've grown up in the business as employees, asking them to then transfer the hat of owner, it can be challenging, but understanding their perspective and their relationship with the business can help you as a SEPA manage that educational process. So this is the same campground family. I want to share just some of the memories for you can see where they went with this. Here's the oldest daughter. I'm not sure which came first, but here are a couple of very early memories. One of my first memory was sitting on the stairs when I was supposed to be asleep, feeling very left out because even though I knew all of the people in the room, my grandparents, my aunts, my uncles, were there, I was not invited to the family member meeting. I remember watering the trees in the park with my dad in the propane truck and being with my dad. The campground is my dad. Second oldest. My earliest memory is probably from when I was some age in elementary school. This actually happened multiple times, but I remember being at the bathhouse at the pool with my sister, talking through the stalls, pretending to be campers. We would go back and forth about what we would think about would be necessary to say if we were really camping, but we would exaggerate it a ton. The funny thing is, looking back, there was probably never anyone in the bathroom to hear us when we were talking, but we thought we were funny and sneaky. Here's the youngest child. Probably not the first one, but most prominent, is riding around the campground doing propane delivery with dad. This campground is my dad. How I hated the smell of propane, but I got to be with my dad and I got to see him being happy. I loved going to work with my dad, even though I was much happier doing anything other than propane deliveries. Just being near my dad made me feel important and included in the family. Here's the first in-laws memory of the receiving generation. The earliest memory that I can think of at this time was my first job as sorting and recycling. I had to empty trash bins and sort cans, glass, plastic, and cardboard. My first memorable memory of the camp, besides meeting my wife, is that I got fired as a lifeguard for leaving the property to go to lunch without telling anyone. Is that not ironic? Because look at me now. I'm the prime manager of this company. But what it gave me was an example of forgiveness, understanding, and second chances. That's what I keep in the back of my head as I manage this company now. Second in-law. The first memory I have is my wife's sister's wedding. Before I saw the park function as a business, I saw it as a community and an extension of this family. Many employees were invited to this wedding. I saw my in-laws as people whose role as parents was tied completely to their roles as owners, and who saw themselves as stewards of an extended community and family. I was introduced to the marital couple, and I celebrated the love and beauty of this conventional family members, as well as their large extended family. So as you, as a SEPA, learn more about these memories, it gives you a better picture of how to manage them. So let's talk about how we're going to do this. When you are working with your owners, whether it be an intergenerational or non-intergenerational transfer, understanding the background of the company and the history will help you do a better job of managing your client. So what I do with them and what these people crave is someone is to listen. And you can do that by a variety of places and ways to do it. I like to do it by first having the owner outline their trajectory of ownership through a timeline. So how did you begin in the business? And I really have them do it from, here's my first year in business. This is what the ownership looked like. These were the owners at the time. This is what I did. Here's how much money we made. These are the hours I worked. This is what we brought home. And why is that important? There's a couple reasons why that's important. One is that it helps you understand the journey that your client has taken in growing and building what they are trying to transfer. When you connect to the owner on an emotional basis, you can help them navigate the often time-consuming process of getting ready to exit the business and create their life after plan and figure out what they need for a budget and find their dream for the next chapter. That's all hard work and it takes time, but being able to help them outline the story gets them much farther in that process. So I'm going to tell you that you're not only going to do it with the owner, but also the spouse, because there's two sides to the story. There's what was going on in the business, and there was what was going on in the family at the time. So I have one client that I started this with, and when we started, he just took it, and it was very data-driven. Here's the year we opened. Here were my partners. Here's the percentage of ownership. This is our gross number of products sold. Here was our net profit. And he went through it annually and it was a 19-year process. So he sends that to me. And then when I sent it back, I added questions. I said, okay, so how many employees did you have? Who worked for you? Were you working any other jobs during this time? How many children did you have each year? What was your wife doing for the company? When did your children start working in the company, if they ever did? Where did you find new partners? When did partners leave? Why did they leave? So then he fleshed that out. So the first draft was 2 or 3 pages long. The second draft was filled in a lot more with words, not just data. So I got that back, and then the next section, the next draft, so I'm on draft 3 here, guys, was tell me what your wife was doing. And I asked his wife to write in, him to share that document with his wife, and write in what was going on at home during this time period. So now the document's about 4.5 pages. And I would go in and I would help edit it a little bit. And we were doing this so that he could tell his story to his 4 daughters that were considering whether or not they wanted to own the business in the future. And as we're going through this storytelling, I said, okay, we got it to about 6 pages. And it's a very detailed, this business had gone and morphed several times. And at one point it was sold and he bought it back about 3 years later. So the next step I said, as I was reading these stories, I said, now I want you to, in a different color, write down the lessons learned at each stage. So if you were going to give this story out to your children or to a buyer or to a key employee that wants to buy, what nuggets can they take away that they can use as business lessons in the future? And part of his story, he talks about buying a press, a plastic, a mold, huge machine inside of his injection molding company. And he needed to, he bought it used, and he needed to transfer it from Upper Michigan into Ohio. And he had engaged with a shipping company. The to put it on the back of a big truck and move it. But what he didn't know was that he had to get permission from multiple jurisdictions to move this huge piece of equipment through their different municipalities. And so in the middle of transporting this big machine, the truck got taken by a state highway patrolman who said that they didn't have the proper paperwork to get it through their municipality. They got stuck for 2.5 days. They had to pay the trucker extra money and the shipping company, and they had to go get licenses and permits. And I said, as he's writing this out, I'm like, what a great story. So from this, you have a little bit of an operations manual, just a tiny, tiny thing that says, when you're shipping large equipment, never do X, always do Y, and make sure you do this. And he went, oh my gosh, I never thought of that. And when we finally got this history done, he had 9 lessons that were able to be cultivated from the storytelling, some of which I was able to use as a SEPA, because when he made bad decisions as a businessman that really kicked him in the behind, he didn't ask anybody else. He didn't have a team like we teach through SEPA. He didn't use his advisors. So at the very end of the story, one of the things he shared with his children was how important working in a team and asking your advisors their opinion on big business decisions is. And it really segued into why he was creating a board of advisors. So that's the magic of helping these people find the story of ownership. So when we're talking about, you see on this slide different questions that you can ask each generation and each memory. In that particular family, we were able to, with the daughters, they're all women, talk about their vision of ownership and their memories of the company. And once we shared this, what became very real was the only reason that generation was interested in keeping the business was because they felt a duty or a sense of obligation to their father to keep his dream alive. And when it came down to it, they were looking at it as a sense of responsibility. And when we dug deep into that, do you want to take on the risks of being a business owner as a sense of obligation to your father's work, or do you want to own this business because you are jazzed and excited about being a business owner? And they went and they worked on that for a while. But that happened out of taking the time to help the business owner cultivate his story of ownership and taking the time to listen to the next generation's vision for that company and why they're doing what they're doing. And that retreat or that workshop was a 6.5-hour workshop with the mother, father, and the women working in the business. And they're still working on it. But what I'm going to suggest to all of you is, how do you take the time and work with your clients to do this? Because of course they're paying you. And many of them are very, very busy people. And so having some sort of an outline to start that conversation and work with them is easy to do, and sending it to them and doing it at night. And then you're just coaching them to accountability, which is what we talk about in our work as SEPAs. When and where. So I think, outlining the business annually is a way to do it. Quoting the project for the work is difficult. So usually what I do is I add it into my first family meeting if I'm doing a family. If not, I like to add it into my assessment. So if you're using Mouse like I do, I ask them before I start that whole assessment process to outline their business for me and the story of ownership, how they acquired it, what have they done to that business since they've owned it, what's their proudest moment of ownership, what's the thing that they wish they had never done. And that just lets them know I care a little bit. And then I'll use that in the future. And you can add to that story as you're doing your Mouse questionnaires. The next thing you're going to do as a SEPA with these stories is you're going to connect interest and combine stories. So when you are looking at the memories of the kids and you're looking at the history from ownership, you can say, you guys see this business the same here. So they see the business as a sense of outreach to the community. They do a lot of volunteering. They the campground, for instance, uses that. They do a free event every year in the community for Special Olympics, where they host a party for the Special Olympics. They donate their space, they donate the food. They've been doing that for 10 years. That's their community outreach. The children know that they've worked in it. They feel very passionate about it. That's a connection, right, between the generations, and one reason they might want to keep the business going. And then how do you use the information? I use this information in a variety of ways. Most of the time I use it to remind them why they're doing the hard work of succession planning and getting them to their ultimate goal. We use these stories also for creating a vision for the future of the company, creating new mission statements, and helping the owner shape the next chapter of their life. It's really powerful, powerful stuff in the 5 stages of succession planning. Many of my clients have a place dedicated in their factory or in their buildings of the business with a memory wall. And as you get the story told and you help them weave it, it often goes on that memory wall in some way. I like to tell my clients now that since the invention of the iPhone and the iPad, don't just write it. If you've got elders that are no longer working in the business, whether that be key employees or key customers, key vendors, go videotape them. Ask them their first memory of the business. Ask them about what is their favorite story of X, Y, and Z business. And you can take those videos and use it as a marketing tool. And in the value enhancement process, it can be very critical. You ask the family to gather pictures, and this is a great way to involve the very youngest members of the family to go take those videos and interview them, because what do grandparents want? They want time with the next generation listening. So it's very powerful. And everybody can be a videographer today with these tools. As the SEPA, you're going to be the curator and the journalist. You're going to send out the questions to the members of the family. You're going to ask family members to collect the pictures and articles. You're going to ask the next generation to get involved. And then you'll help turn it into a story from data. And that can turn into this, which is a legacy wall. This legacy wall that you're looking at is from a campground in Myrtle Beach, North Carolina. And my best friend from high school is the marketing director for that campground. It's one of the largest campgrounds in the United States. And it is on its 2nd generation of ownership. And in this, what they did was they spent 2 years collecting the story of the building of Ocean Lakes Campground. And this is displayed on a wall in the nature center of their campground. And next to it is a great big, huge metal L. And my girlfriend sent me the building of this wall, and I was so excited. I was like, oh, this is so cool. This resonates with me so much. It's a legacy wall. And she said, what? And I said, yeah, it's a legacy wall. And she goes, no, it's not. It used to be called Lakeside Campground. And I said, no, look at that L. It's a legacy wall. And what I encourage my clients to do is create something like this, because it will not only unite your family, it unites your employees. Your employees get to see the history and struggle of this business, because not all of them have been there with you. Your clients get to see it. Your vendors get to see it. And it is a uniting story for the struggle of being an entrepreneur in the United States. So you can use this in multiple ways. And it's fun and exciting. So the plastic injection molding company that I was telling you about is starting that progress. And they are a very faith-based company. And when you walk into their business, on the immediate left of the door is a biblical saying posted on the wall. And they relayed a story to me that they actually just landed a huge account because of that. And my response to them is, now just imagine what would have happened if the story of your business was next to that biblical quote. How do you use that? How you're using that in your daily life to start from nothing to grow it to what you have today and where you can expand on in the future. So that's just one example of how we're doing it. But when we're doing the storytelling, we're really mining for interest and connecting goals. So again, your questions are going to be what's in these slides. You know, what is your first memory? What did the business mean to you? What are your dreams for the business? What are your fears? So that's for both generations or for someone who's getting to sell. I'm going to sum up this presentation. I think I've got about 10 more minutes with additional story of my owner and all the drafts that he did. He talked about the fact that he started it in 1983 and how he started with just him and his wife and 2 partners. So this really moved his daughters. From our startup in 1984 until 1988, we hired people as we needed them, but we could not keep up with the orders on our own, and there were 3 partners. They all worked another job. So my client's father was their first employee. He worked for us during first shift hours, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. His father only worked for us until 1987 when he retired. He had previously lost his leg below the knee in 1979 and had not worked until he came to help them. My client's sister also worked in the business, and she had quit her job when she moved from Columbus. During the first 4 years of being in business, there was not a lot of profit able to be distributed to the owners. We did pay a small bonus in the second year, which made us all feel ecstatic. We received $500 as our first payment of 4 years of time put into the business. Most of the money was kept in the business to pay off debt to buy more equipment. When his daughters heard that story, they literally stopped him and said, "So Dad, you worked 2 jobs. You worked a day shift job and a night shift job for your business, slept 3 hours a day, and didn't make money for the first 2 years of ownership. And then when you made money, you were excited about $500. And he's like, yes, you could have seen their mouths drop to the floor. And what they both said is, oh my gosh, is that what it takes to be an owner? What a lesson. I bet they'll never forget that struggle. Some of the lessons he told them in the story were as follows. Lack of foresight on the consequences of merging with others. Because I was doing a considerable amount of business with X company at the time of the sale, 5 of the members of that company quit to come form the new company with mine. The plan was for C, that's the name of the company, to develop new business in the heavy truck market and build a company in that direction. It took a lot of work. In 1989, there was a manager hired by the corporation as the new president because of the relationships he had with the heavy truck industry. I was moved to the COO position. Because of the difference in management teams and my running a small company, I always felt the odd man out as I did not understand why the big corporation was doing what it was doing. I remembered in late March, I continued to watch how much money was being spent and had to be raised to build new businesses that were making nothing. I asked lots of questions when we were going to worry about making profit for the company in order to be able to survive. I don't know, it seemed like common sense to me. But I was told that we were now publicly held and we did not need to worry about whether we made a profit. It made no sense to me, girls, but I did what I was told. I was always unsure of my responsibilities at that point, and I made weekly trips to corporate meetings where nothing got done. So what his story was to the girls at that point was, when you do a business transition and you sell, make sure you know what you're selling to and what your role is going to be. And know the culture of the company that you're going to be working and sleeping with. It took me 3 drafts to get that story out of him. He wrote about the failure and his mistake, but he didn't write about the lesson that he could transfer to his kids or to future owners about making merger decisions and how complicated that is, and how you have to know about the culture of the company that you're merging with. So with a lot of work and effort, you can mine those stories and help your client find new things. To give you an example of what the wife added to this, she talked about the fact that early on in their business, they had 2 little kids, and that they would see their father less than 2 hours a day. And what helped me as a SEPA with her story and vision of this is this particular owner, as a 50% owner in the company, is very worried about her daughters being owners of a company, because her vision of being an owner is what it was like for her and her husband when their kids were small and he was working 80 to 90 hours a week. And her daughters all have multiple children. And her concern is, and what came out was from the storytelling, is that her vision of motherhood is a mother that stays home and raises their kids, because that's what she did. It was her job to completely run the household. And she is afraid of is if her daughters become owners of this company, that they will be unsuccessful mothers, because they will be at the company as much as her husband was. So from her point of view, as that extra spouse, and telling what happened in the development of this company and her involvement, we were able to mine why she's so resistant to her daughters becoming owners of the company. And that's how we can lock and join interest and begin to have those difficult conversations. The other things that were kind of exciting was to hear the story of the money. So the manager, the husband who ran the company, the operations director, talks about profit and how much money they got and what they were able to do with it. But the wife talks about what that meant to them. So in the beginning, she talks about how their vacations with their little kids were really driving to see future customers. They would stay in the hotel, her husband would go court the customer, and how her 2 oldest girls never had a full Happy Meal because they didn't have the money for it. They would buy one Happy Meal and they would divide it up between the 2 girls. But the youngest doesn't ever remember sharing a Happy Meal. And why is that important? That seems like kind of an inane story, but it's not. Because what you're talking about is the oldest to the youngest. There is a 12-year difference between them. What happened in those 12 years was that the business got profitable. So the social growth of their economic structure, or their economic growth of their business, resulted into a change in social structure in the family. The youngest has no understanding of sacrifice. The oldest does, but not the youngest. So when we're talking about transferring ownership, what does that do with work ethic and the view of ownership? Those are all questions to be discussed and looked at. So we're about 15 minutes away. And what I want to tell all of you is that these slides can be sent to you. And I know that Drew is recording this education seminar, but I can also PDF the outlines of the questions to anybody that wants them, and I'm going to send that in a PDF to Drew. The most important thing I can tell you as a SEPA is please take time to listen to your clients, more than just a computer questionnaire. And I know all of you are very skilled listeners, or you wouldn't hold the certificates that you do, and you wouldn't be as successful as you are. And you made it through the class at SEPA, which is a lot of listening. But taking the time to hear the non-financial side of your client's life will get you to success and help you finish the exit process. What we have done in my business is we make this a pure routine now. And it helps us with assessing where the business is at and keeping that dream moving forward. So this will only get better if I get some questions from people. So Drew, can you give me some of the questions that you might have on your side at this point?
Yeah, Amy, actually at the moment, no one's typed in any questions. So if there's any questions you might have or comments, please go ahead and type those into the questions box at this time.
Drew, do you have any questions after listening to this?
Yeah, I mean, a few more notes than anything. I was jotting down some notes while you were talking there, Amy. It's those stories when you're going through. Not only were they beneficial and kind of walk you through, but it leads to which questions you really need to ask and find out from from a family owned business and try to find out their history. What would be like the one or two must ask questions when you walk into like maybe that first or second conversation with a business?
I always like to ask why you do this. Why did you start doing this business? What does it mean to you? And that's, for me, I get a sense of, are they doing it because they had to do it? Because they didn't have any other work opportunities? It was expected of them to go into this? Did they fall into it? Or was it something they really, really wanted to do? They sought it out. It was a dream. It was something they always wanted to do. And the reason I do that is because that connection, that emotional connection to the business, helps me figure out how hard it's going to be for them to let it go. And when Chris teaches this class, he often talks about the cycle of ownership when he talks about exit planning, and that sometimes owners get bored with their business, which can devalue the business. Sometimes it just needs to be resparked for that value enhancement side. But that first question, why do you do this every day, really gets me to hone in on where they're at in that cycle. And then the next question I like to ask is, what's your the thing you're most proud of in this business cycle that you're in, or in ownership? What are you most proud of during your time of ownership? Because that tells you a lot. Are they proud of just money? Are they proud of employees? Are they, what are they proud of? And that tells you what drives them. And then the biggest mistake that they've made as owners is also very telling and will help you as a SEPA. If they say, I've never made a mistake, I think that tells you more than anything. But when they talk about their mistakes, to me, that's where the biggest learning moments are for an owner and for us as SEPAs to work with. So those three things. And then I think also talking about who are your favorite customers? Why are they your favorite customers? The other question I talk a lot about is, what keeps you up at night? What makes you the most worried? You'll learn a lot from your clients from that. And then if you're talking to a potential employee that wants to buy, or a strategic buyer, also doing some of that work with them. And you don't always get that, by the way. I mean, rarely get that when you're not in an intergenerational transfer. But if you have a key employee that's going to buy and you're trying to help negotiate that transfer, you can do that with a key employee. And you can help connect their interest and their dreams so that the deal gets done and doesn't fall apart. Any other questions, Drew?
Yeah, just kind of going off of that, Amy, another question I have is, are you having these questions and these conversations with just the owner, like kind of a closed door atmosphere, or are you having an open discussion with whether it's an employee who wants to buy, or if it's a son or a daughter that's looking to take over? Do you have that conversation, those questions with just the owner, or with the entire family or whoever's involved?
I usually do it individually first, and I help sort that out first and get it into a format that the other person can hear. So I will do these interviews separately, and then I have a workshop where I bring it together and they get to share their stories. The reason I do it separately is because when you're doing these interviews, it never stays on track. People veer off a lot, and you can get into stories that the other person might not want to hear or shouldn't hear yet until you kind of filter it as the SEPA.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point as well. I was trying to think how you might position that, and it makes sense to do it separately to then kind of direct to the discussion when everyone's together, so to make it useful for everyone's time as well, not just kind of bouncing ideas and thoughts off each other. So that's great. Thank you.
Yeah. So some of the other questions I get from clients is, I hear this a lot in the farming community. You know, my grandfather owns 800 acres, and I currently farm for him, and I have 20 other landlords, and I'm processing 5,000 acres. But I really want my grandfather's land, and he won't tell anybody what's going on with his land. And I say, well, do you talk about it? And they said, well, he won't talk about it when we ask questions. And I said, well, maybe you're talking about it in the wrong way. Maybe you're talking about it from a sense of entitlement instead of a sense of respect. And when you go back and interview Grandpa about how long he's owned the land, how he got the land, what was it like being a farmer in 1960 versus being a farmer today? What did you farm? How did, you know, make it about him and spending time with him instead of about, I want your land, and by the way, I don't want to pay for it. It changes the whole dynamic of the conversation and opens doors in ways that it would never, ever be discussed in any other format. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it makes a ton of sense. If you don't mind, Amy, can you scroll to your last slide to show your contact information?
Sure. And again, anybody that wants to experiment with this, wants to call and talk to me about how I use this and in what manner I implement it, I am more than willing to talk to other SEPAs and help other SEPAs get started in this methodology.
Amy, do you mind going to that slide for me real quick?
I'm there.
It's not showing on our side.
Is it? Oh man, let's see. Let's show it up. Are you there now?
Go back one. You went one too far, it looks like. Okay, well, either way, I'll send out Amy's address, so if anyone has any questions or anything you want to take immediately with Amy, you could send it directly to her. Or you can just reach out to myself here at the office. I'd be more than happy to direct questions to her as well. But with that, if there isn't any questions at this moment, we can get everyone back into their busy Wednesdays, I'm sure. But like I said, I'll be sending out the recording later today with the PDF of the slides. And then also, Amy said she was going to send me a PDF of some of the questions as well. So I'll send all that out to you later today. So just look for an email from me. But Amy, thank you for spending some time with us today and going through the stories. I thought that was very beneficial, and I hope everyone found and got something out of our session today. But with that, Amy, thank you very much. Everyone, thank you for
so much, everybody.
And we'll talk soon. Thank you very much.